Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Selma Avdic, and I will be your moderator for today's all-day MarTech virtual conference, which will feature the latest tips and trends on how to utilize marketing and technology in your workplace. So on behalf of the American Marketing Association and our generous sponsors, I want to thank you all again for finding some time to learn with us today. All right, so before we officially get started, I do want to cover just some important housekeeping items. So our sessions will be available on demand until January 13th, 2019. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to revisit and rewatch these great sessions. Also, you can download these sessions in your folder icon and have the presentation slides. This is also available in the Resource Center as well. We also encourage you all and invite you all to continue the conversation on social, and you can do so by referencing hashtag AMA Virtual. And if at any point you have any questions, need assistance, we encourage you to reach out. We have AMA staff available, and you can also email us at info@ama.org, and we'd be happy to assist. All right, so with that, I am pleased to welcome our opening keynote session. And so our session is titled Gen Z and the Evolution of Experience. And this will be presented by Tom Edwards, who is the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer at Epsilon. And I do want to share a little bit about Tom before I turn it over to him. So Tom was recently recognized by Advertising Age as a 2017 marketing technology trailblazer. He also regularly provides thought leadership and commentary on business and advertising in publications such as Forbes, VentureBeat, Mashable, just to name a few. And he is also a regular speaker as a futurist. So some of his talks have been at TEDx, Ad Age Data, Mobile World Congress, just to highlight a few. So with that, I'm very excited to turn it over to Tom to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Selma. I really appreciate the introduction. And again, I'm Tom Edwards, and today we're going to talk about Gen Z computer vision and the evolution of experience. Excited to get started. All right. So what do you start and end your day with? What connects you with loved ones? What gets you from point A to point B? So it's in your pocket, your purse, or your hand right now. It's your mobile device. And it's become the center of our world, to where now basically technology equals culture, and that's primarily driven through the mobile device. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about a time going into the very near future when the mobile device is no longer going to be the primary way in which we interface with technology. And I'm actually going to give the actual year in which our environment is going to begin to adapt us versus us adapting to it. But before we go into the future, I like to go back and look at the past a little bit. We'll go back to the future a little bit. We'll start there. So growing up in the 70s and early 80s, I loved Star Wars. I still do to this day. Instead of wanting to be Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, though, I was really enamored with C-3PO and R2-D2 and how they worked, and how the technology from the Star Wars universe just seemed to enable and empower the characters every step of the way. But growing up in the early 80s, technology wasn't quite to the level of Star Wars just yet. I'm a huge gamer, still am, play with my kids. More on that in a bit. But growing up in the 80s, gaming was self-contained. There was no Xbox Live. There was no co-op play. It was 8-bit and 16-bit. Also, when I talk about entertainment, I love giant robot shows. You can begin to see a little bit of a theme here as I'm talking about my childhood. Yes, robots and video games. Yeah. But anyway, in order to watch my favorite giant robot shows, I would have to catch it whenever it aired. Otherwise, I may have to wait months in order to catch up with the latest episode. Then moving into the 90s, we begin to see kind of the first inkling of the emerging technologies that we're getting used to today. We saw the rise of connectivity. You see on the screen right now the dial-up for AOL. Does anybody potentially have the ringtone for the sounds that it made? But regardless, you begin to see the rise of connectivity. You begin to see the rise of the graphical user interface. And you also begin to see the rise of mobile devices. Now, mobile in the 90s, it took a number of different form factors, hundreds of different mobile devices. You begin to see kind of this slow adoption of mobile technology. But then heading into the 2000s, we begin to see this acceleration of adoption. And one of my favorite phones from that period of time was definitely the Motorola Razr. I loved it. So one of the things about the Razr, though, is you remember trying to text with that, the 3 numbers and the 3 letters? It was a little difficult. But the key thing to remember about mobile technology in the early 90s, innovation, true disruption begins with removing a barrier, while also building on something that's familiar. Most of the form factors up until that point in time still look like mobile phones that you might find in your home. But then in 2007, we see the release of Apple's original iPhone. And this was a game changer in a number of ways. You see this consolidation of various form factors into one. You see a video camera, a music player, etc. A really revolutionary kind of touch screen interface that's redefined how we actually interact with our mobile devices. But I would argue the bigger innovation actually came in 2008 with the launch of the App Store. The App Store is what actually allowed us as individual users the ability to customize the experience. And that personalization is so incredibly important. To this day, there have been 180 billion applications that have been downloaded. And it's this kind of democratization and control that's provided by the App Store that's really led to rapid adoption of the devices. Now today, you fast forward, 5 years after the iPhone launched, 1 in 5 people owned a smartphone. Now fast forward to today, 95% of people own a mobile device. 77% of those are actually smartphones. And this ubiquity and this accessibility and ubiquity has led to empowerment. We're empowered to create. We're empowered to amplify, and the whole idea of influence has shifted. So from a creation standpoint, we create 400 million selfies every day. 95 million of those end up on Instagram. We create 300 hours of YouTube video content every minute. So we're definitely empowered to create. Our expectations of how we consume information has definitely changed as well. We expect to control the experiences. When the US Airways flight crashed in the Hudson, it was actually first reported by a Twitter user. And that acceleration and expectation of real-time news and information, it's still carrying through today and well into tomorrow as technology evolves as well. And influence has changed. Previously, influence came from Hollywood, but now, when you start looking at Generation Z, 1996 to 2010, influence comes from YouTube celebrities and their favorite gaming streamers. So taking all of this into consideration, understanding how technology has evolved over the last 20 or 30 years, now as I look to the future, I like to look at it through the lens of 3 core territories, and I call it E-3. It's all about technology that empowers. It's all about the intelligent systems that are essentially going to provide exponential acceleration around how technology is going to evolve around us, and enhanced. That's the connection of physical and digital reality. So as I look at those 3 territories and the convergence of the 3, the remainder of this presentation is going to take a look at each of those territories, and we're going to start with empower. So as I mentioned previously, empower is all about how technology empowers consumers' lives. And it's all about this shift towards control. And I see it in my own home. I have 3 Gen Zs. I've got a 15, a 13, and a 10-year-old. They're part of the first mobile first generation. They learn to swipe before they learn to speak. And their specific group is going to represent 40% of consumers by the year 2020. And their behaviors are going to have a significant impact on how we actually interact with technology. So they spend about 2.5 hours a day with on-demand content. YouTube has become a remote control. So whether that's Netflix, whether that's YouTube, whether that's Twitch, regardless, they're in control of their entertainment experiences. The other aspect is gaming. That's my 15-year-old son, Gavin, in the middle. He's an aspiring esports athlete. 300 million people right now are currently watching esports. That's 3 times the viewership of the NFL. And he always jokes with myself and my wife that he wants to be this esports athlete, but it's athletics of the mind. And so that's always a fun point of discussion in our household. But regardless, Gen Z spends an hour and a half a day gaming in addition to the 2.5 hours of on-demand content. And finally, they spend 51 minutes a day listening to music. And that's important because music is one of the primary use cases for how Gen Z actually interacts with smart speakers and virtual assistants. So, but the number one core takeaway on how Gen Z's behaviors and technology is going to essentially evolve is through the camera. The camera has become a home screen, and Gen Z is evolving the role of the camera well beyond capture into communication, exploration, and ultimately it's going to lead towards intelligence. But starting with capture. So when we think about the camera, my generation and others, we tend to think of it simply as a device that captures and saves our memories and how we view the world. And then we take those and share those out. There are 1.3 trillion images captured last year. But when you start thinking about Gen Z, the camera is essentially a communication platform. It's replaced 100 years of other previous mechanisms for communication. You know, previous generations wrote letters, others made phone calls, others made text, others used text. Now with Gen Z, it's primarily about face-to-face communication via FaceTime or some other type of face-to-face technology. And I see it in my own home. My children will not make a call without actually, it's just weird to them to actually make a call. So the other thing to consider is that Generation Z are definitely, they view themselves as creators. 69% view the camera as a platform to create from. 66% have their own YouTube channel. They view the camera and specifically augmented reality filters and other type of entities that can enhance the creation experience, whether that's with the live camera or post with the capture and some filters. They view the camera now as a tool for expression. And this is important from a content marketing perspective. We've gone through this shift from content marketing to contextual marketing to real-time marketing. One of the other shifts that's coming, there are 2. The first one is essentially this idea of enabling creation versus pushing a branded content. With Gen Z, it's incredibly important to understand that it's about enabling their creativity and providing experiences and tools that can allow them to express themselves. That's an important one from a marketing perspective. And we're seeing it from some of the largest providers out there as well. So you've got Facebook and you have Snap. And Snap basically released statistics recently that showed they have 70 million people that are interacting with augmented reality filters on a daily basis. And so this idea of enhancing the experience is incredibly key. From a marketing perspective, we've gone from this idea of content marketing to contextual marketing. Now it's all about enabling creation and creativity. So especially with Gen Z, you're even seeing real-time data being pulled into these experiences via Facebook here. And this is an important point to consider because when it comes to the camera, even think back to a couple of years ago with Pokemon Go, 50 million people running around using the camera as this aperture to the world, trying to basically catch little digital Pokemon. It's things like this that essentially start this idea of the shifting of behavior, and this is how adoption starts. Sometimes it starts as kind of a toy or a fun entertainment experience, and then those experiences begin to build as they become democratized. And we're seeing that now with augmented reality. So as you get into the camera now as an experience mechanism, it's this democratization and ability to create experiences that are going to drive this idea of adoption of AR. And this is why I view the camera as this bridge platform. It's the next marketing platform for the near future. And that's going to continue to evolve as we get into artificial intelligence and the role of the camera shifting towards an intelligent device. But we can't understate the importance of the empowered consumer and the role that the camera is going to play moving forward. So that was Empower. It's all about the empowered consumer. Now we're going to start shifting this discussion towards artificial intelligence and exponential acceleration. I used to talk about this idea that disruption was the new normal. You think about how the App Store disrupted. But now I feel as though it's less about disruption and more about exponential acceleration, specifically through artificial intelligence. So AI has been a hot button topic for the past year. There's significant media velocity around AI. You see major organizations shifting their focus from mobile first organizations to AI first. This is such as Microsoft. You look at Facebook and Google are all restructuring their organizations to where AI is a core element to drive the business forward. And we're going to see significant impacts on business. By 2020, it's projected to have an impact of 36 billion. Fast forward to 2025, it's 127 billion. So the role that AI is going to play is incredibly important in terms of how technology is going to become more invisible and just more interactive with us on a daily basis. Now, when it comes to artificial intelligence, we sometimes have a preconceived notion of what this is actually going to be. So some of it comes from entertainment experiences, whether that's the T-800 from Terminator or the machines from The Matrix or HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey. But the reality is there are three primary forms of artificial intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence, think about Alexa and Siri. Artificial general intelligence, think about Siri and Alexa being able to answer pretty much any query that you give to it. And then there's artificial superintelligence, like Ultron from Avengers. We'll not talk about that, but I'm much more of a believer in intelligence augmentation versus AI taking over the world. And there are three primary reasons why we're seeing this golden age of artificial intelligence. The first is the reduced cost from a hardware perspective for graphical processing units. This allows kind of parallel processing of information as well as visualizing that. So that's one key piece. But from a marketing perspective, the one that's really important is the fact that data is oil for AI. It's the most important component when you start thinking about how the ability to process large amounts of information. We see this rapid rise of big data over the past however many years. But now what we're actually able to do is through both machine learning and deep learning, it's this idea of more advanced algorithms. We can not only take large data sets where we've created 10 trillion gigabytes of data in the last year, we can actually begin to action off of that. Machine learning is simply human-coded algorithms where humans are going in and weighting the different kind of variables associated with that. And there's a lot that you can do from a marketing perspective. You can look at and analyze categories quickly. You can derive insights, themes, perceptions, occasions, looking at psychographic information about an individual and then begin to apply that into personality models. Then there's deep learning, which actually allows the system begins to train itself. It doesn't require humans to weight the information. And the most important element outside of this is that the impact on business is going to be felt in a couple ways. The first is we're going to shift from rules-based engines and intelligence towards algorithms, to where the algorithms are going to help drive a number of functions, from an organizational efficiency standpoint, and then moving forward into consumer experience. The number one key piece, though, throughout all of this is this evolution towards predictive decisioning. So we talked about content marketing, contextual marketing, this need now to create and enhance experiences through the camera creation. But ultimately, it's going to be the ability for AI to drive predictive decisioning that's going to have the biggest impact on marketing over the course of the next 10 years. And here's how. So we're quickly moving towards a time to where marketing is going to evolve beyond the desktop and the mobile device into multimodal, which is voice, vision, and touch. And the first that's really driving mass appeal right now is voice. So when we start thinking about voice and voice-based experiences, 2016 was definitely the year of the chatbot. Consumers feel safe whenever they're having a threaded conversation. Also, social messaging surpassed social media within 2016. There's an expectation now for on-demand interaction with an organization. Like 69% of millennials want to be able to ask a question of a brand 24 hours a day, whether that's real-time or asynchronous. So there's already an expectation and a use for social messaging. And we even recently saw how Facebook's evolving messaging to incorporate even more of the augmented reality elements as well. So now they're taking their whole AR frame studio now and allowing creation even within social messaging. So conversational experiences and chatbots kind of paved the way to where in 2017, it was all about voice-based systems. So Alexa voice services stole the show at CES last year, and now 1 in 5 homes has a smart speaker in their home. Alexa represents 70% of the footprint, Amazon represents 70% of the footprint. Google represents 30. As marketers though, what we have to understand is that it's not only about the smart speaker in the kitchen or the home. What we see happening is it's more about the portability of the voice service. The voice service can reside in a multitude of different form factors. You essentially need a Wi-Fi connection, Bluetooth, speaker, and now you're going to see the shift to where you're going to have millions of sensors and devices that are going to be coming online. And then you're also going to have this portability of the voice service to where it can be in a washing machine, in your smart speaker, in your car, on your watch, within your TV. The virtual assistant is going to become pervasive in throughout our lives. Now, with Alexa specifically, from a brand perspective, it's incredibly important to design voice-first experiences in addition to what you're already doing online and via mobile. There are 30,000 skills. A skill is essentially, think of it like an application within the Alexa ecosystem. And now there's a multitude of ways in which you can create different skills. And with even individual consumers, the Alexa team recently launched Blueprints, which allows for the personalization of experiences. You can leave a note to your babysitter. It's this democratization of the tools to where it's easier for individuals to interact with it. That will then drive even more adoption of the tools and services. Now with Google and Google Assistant is across 500 million devices, 500 million. It's across iPhone, Android, watch, car, Google Home, etc. And it's connected to the Google Knowledge Graph. So this is incredibly important as you begin to see the connectivity, you begin to see the pathways to where the virtual assistant is connected into this incredible corpus of data. And it's able to then begin driving predictive decisioning on your behalf to where ultimately we begin to automate certain aspects of our lives via AI and virtual assistants. And I call this the proxy web. So across my research, there is one consistent theme from Gen Z to millennial to Gen X to boomer. It is this: if artificial intelligence can provide convenience and ease of use to their daily lives, that's what's going to drive the most adoption. So with this idea of the proxy web, as virtual assistants are becoming more intelligent, Siri's about to receive a massive update from Apple here recently. You're seeing added intelligence added into Google Assistant. The proxy web is this idea that essentially we as individuals begin to offload more of our daily responsibilities onto these virtual assistants. They become proxies for us. Gen Z expects this virtual assistant to manage more of their personal time. Millennials want to replenish purchases through virtual assistants. Gen X is all about how can they manage their finances better and have your finances analyzed and predictions made and help to manage money. So it's incredibly important to realize that this specific shift is coming. And from a marketing perspective, what this actually means, it means that it's not just about marketing to the individual consumer, but it's also marketing to systems and algorithms. There's going to be a split. There's so much talk and discussion from a marketing perspective about the consumer decision journey. Different journeys are created that map out, different interaction points across these various channels, offline, all together combined. But what marketers have to understand is that with the rise of the proxy web, there are a couple things that are going to happen. The first is there's going to be a disintermediation of brands. So what that means is if you have a native application experience versus basically feeding into and being a part of the voice-based ecosystem, you have to consider both. You have to consider your mobile presence, but you also have to consider the role that your organization, your brand is going to play from a voice-based perspective in controlling those experiences. Otherwise, with Google Assistant, you may end up just within a search query versus actually controlling and having the ability to deep link into those experiences moving forward. So system-based marketing, the role that data plays in terms of informing AI is incredibly important. And basically having a strategy for how you're going to evolve your brand's role within voice and voice-based strategy is incredibly important to consider in the near term. Now, as we move into enhanced. This is where we begin to align physical and digital reality. We already see the behaviors coming to light through the empowered consumer. Now we're beginning to see how AI and virtual assistants are going to begin to continue to seamlessly make technology disappear into the background. So what we're going to focus on next, we talked about voice. Now we're going to talk about vision and touch. And before we get there, when I was at South by Southwest, I stopped by the Bose booth, and they had a very interesting technology. They had what was called audio augmented reality. And to this point, I always think of augmented reality as this heads-up display, digital overlay of the world. What was interesting about the Bose experience is that it was audio-led first. So the AR component is basically invisible markers in the world that initiate the verbal experience. But it was not as jarring to have basically an audio cue playing in your ear as you're walking around versus heads up. So there may be a stair step towards how we actually drive larger scale adoption of AR. Now, when we talk about vision, another subset of artificial intelligence is called computer vision. Computer vision is basically being able to take and pull out high dimensional contextual elements of your environment to drive decisioning. So it adds an intelligence layer now. You're able to pull out context from your environment and actually be able to take an action off of that. And even now, it's advanced to the point so much over the past few years. Facebook recently featured during their developer conference this idea of dense posed, where they can actually take people that are moving at various speeds, immediately recognize them, overlay elements on top of their body, and allow for augmented reality experiences to happen in near real time. A few years ago, that was just unheard of. And computer vision is also redefining retail. These are actually some of the sensors that are within Amazon Go's concept store. But as you start looking at some of this is also from a recent startup I met with down at South by Southwest. But you look at the role that computer vision is even going to play from a retail perspective, adding another layer of intelligence into kind of the behavioral aspect of going into a retail location, looking at what actually captures and garners attention, being able to then manage inventory and streamline this entire process. So the ability to add additional intelligence and context within an environment is definitely going to have an impact on retail marketing and shopper marketing as well. Now, when we talked about the empowered consumer, we talked about this evolution from capture to communicate to expression. Now we're looking at intelligence. This is where it's all leading. The alignment and kind of intersection of behavior and technology, to where with this specific example that you're seeing on the screen, this is where you can take a computer vision driven experience that is then merged with a virtual assistant. So now you can have an intelligent understanding of the environment that immediately links into this giant knowledge graph, and yet another way to enhance your daily life. So the final aspect is touch. So as we get into this, and the video that you see kind of playing on the screen right now is you begin to see different hand motions. And those hand motions actually then are able to control various gestures, various controls that are almost invisible to the eye. But this idea of gesture-based interfaces is another way in which we're going to be able to have our environment adapt more to us versus us inputting into the environment. And this is incredibly key to pay off this idea of multimodal at scale. Again, it's about using voice, it's about using vision, and it's about using touch to change the way in which we interact and interface with technology over time. Then what happens is we begin to shift towards this idea of mixed reality. This is where you can take and begin to combine all of these elements. You have augmented reality. You've got the ability to spatially interact via touch, grab the shark, drop it down on the table, and begin interacting with a world that isn't necessarily physically there. And so as you think about how that can project out, this is always a fun video to show. This is an idea of synthetic reality. This is where you take the idea of augmented reality at scale, and you begin to visualize different overlays. As you see the individual walking down the street, everything becomes a canvas. And a side note, the joke I always make is, if I had it to do all over again, I would go to law school and study digital rights management, because that's going to be the next big area of focus. Now, as the individual walks into a grocery store and you see a little virtual pet that pops up on the shopping cart, you can begin to see how this entertainment and expression and personalized experience can even take place within a shopping journey here as well. So it's just a fun kind of mock up and look at the potential future state. But this really brings us back to, how will we evolve? So as I prepared for this talk, I realized that I've owned 18 phones over the last 20 years. Now, the one piece that's been incredibly consistent over the course of that time has been the operating system. There hasn't been a significant groundbreaking shift and change. And as I mentioned previously, the App Store hasn't been disrupted since 2008. So what's going to end up happening, and you're already seeing it from certain device manufacturers, there's a focus on some of the experimental operating systems on putting the virtual assistant in the middle of the experience. What that will do is that will essentially deconstruct the need to have hundreds of applications on your phone. We have hundreds of apps, we may only use 9. But whenever you add that layer of predictive decisioning, we're going to see a shift to what's called scenes. So instead of me having to go to a separate application to check into a flight, for me to then to map the route to the airport, to turn on my pool when I get home, or turn on music, all of those will be managed by a virtual assistant, and it'll be done through the context of a scene. So a scene could be, the virtual assistant knows I like to check in 2 hours early for a flight, checks me in, submits me for an upgrade, automatically pre-routes the route to the airport. Upon return home, it knows the route, how long it would take for me to get home. It can heat the pool so I can have a nice evening with the family, turn on music, and just go. Again, it's about understanding, predicting my specific needs based on past behaviors, and then being able to just seamlessly have the technology interacting with me versus me inputting directly into the technology. So the next question I always get is, when? When is this going to happen? So conducted quite a bit of research on this. There's a lot of discussions from 2021 to 2024 and different form factors and different types of adoption, etc. But what it really comes down to, my core belief, is that by 2028, based on the exponential shifts and changes in technology and some of the patents that have recently been filed and the acceleration of and the advancement of some of this technology, combined with the fact that a lot of the AI-based technology is open source, which means that it's not just up to a few large companies to define the direction. There's kind of a balancing that's happening to where there's there's an acceleration within innovation. So I feel that by 2028, we're going to see multimodal at scale. What's also interesting is the form factors now. When you think about voice, vision, and touch, you can then project how this will shift from the mobile device into other form factors. And with Gen Z and millennials, they're incredibly open, based on my research, to wearing either some form of glasses or contact lens to redefine their world. Not necessarily open to any type of brain implant just yet, maybe one too many Black Mirror episodes, I don't know. But to kind of restate some of the core themes from the presentation, understand the role the camera is going to play as the next marketing platform. That's incredibly important. And I also like to talk about this idea of the new 4 Ps. So I also teach at SMU here in Dallas. I've taught thousands of beginning, introduction to marketing students, and we always talk about the four Ps: price, product, place, promotion. Now, based on this shift towards AI, I look at 4 new Ps that you have to consider as marketers. There's psychographics, predictive, proxy, and pervasive. With psychographics, it's all about the data, and it's moving beyond just core demographic data in terms of your segmentation and really focusing on affinities, themes, occasions, perceptions, and using machine learning to drive new ways to derive insights that inform business strategy as well as creative messaging. So that's incredibly important, how you dimensionalize data. The second one is understand the role that predictive decisioning is going to play, and the fact that it's not just about an individual consumer, but it's also going to be about the consumer and their potential virtual assistant here as well. But understanding what role that your organization can play to add convenience, but also begin to add layers of prediction into the decisioning process is incredibly important. The proxy web. So this is another area that we as marketers have to pay attention to. You have to claim your space when it comes to some of these voice-based experiences to start. then also monitor voice, then also monitor vision and touch. And as those experiences evolve, and the role that your brand plays, the role that that first and third party data plays during the course of this is also incredibly important. And then finally, understand that design is extending well beyond mobile when it comes to the creation of user experiences. So designing for voice first requires a completely different perspective than traditional web-based design, because there's a zero UI type of interface here. And as you design for vision as well as touch, you have to rethink the approach to creation here. And so that is essentially the three core territories of eCarat3. We look at voice, vision, and touch. And then ultimately we look at this filter of empower, exponential, and enhance. And over the course of this period of time, I just wanted to thank everyone again for this this fun journey of going from when we go where we are today with the mobile device all the way to the near future, where the technology is going to essentially interact with us versus us inputting into it. So thank you very much. I'm Tom Edwards. If you have any questions, you can email me at tom.edwards@epsilon.com. Otherwise, I'll pass it back over to Selma for any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Tom, for that fantastic presentation. Again, I do want to encourage our audience to connect. Please connect with Tom if you want to continue this conversation. He's graciously provided his contact information. This is a very relevant topic. So, Tom, I'm sure you're going to be receiving tons of emails. But we do have quite a few questions, and we'll try to get through some of them. One audience member is curious if you can provide us with examples of brands that are experimenting with augmented reality, so similar to what you presented in the presentation.
Absolutely. So one of the core areas that actually Facebook demonstrated, they've recently extended this whole idea of the AR Frame Studio into Instagram and into Messenger. And some of the examples they showed a great example from Nike that actually tied into the share out of the experience, unlocked another experience via AR to showcase this new shoe that just dropped. They also worked with BMW to showcase and highlight, how you can interact and view an augmented reality car experience to get a really good feel. Snap recently showed how basically Stranger Things 2 did a really interesting AR-based immersive experience to where you could actually go into like the buyer's living room and basically see everything and see some of the creatures. So again, different types of experiences, but again, it was about creating either entertainment, but Nike was the one that they were actually driving utility, but also trying to drive a social factor in terms of the share out. So that was an interesting one to definitely look up.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for those examples. Another question for you, Tom. Are there other interfaces that are on the horizon beside voice, vision, and touch?
Absolutely. So I alluded to some of them during the course of the presentation, but there's a whole rapid focus around biological interfaces as well. So, and a number of them that are actually direct to brain interfaces. Some of them are invasive, some are not. Some that are really gaining some popularity actually sit towards the back of your neck. They basically work with some of your brain waves. Facebook's working on technology that would allow you to think and basically type significantly faster. So, and controlling experiences directly from your mind. So those are some really interesting territories that are definitely out on they're a little bit more future state than probably 10 years, but they're definitely in the works.
All right. Wow. Okay. So I think we might have time for just one more question. And the question for you, Tom, is, in your opinion, what role will physical robots play versus virtual assistants?
So robots were a consistent theme of the presentation. So dating back to C3PO and R2D2 for sure. No, over the past couple of years, specifically at CES, you've seen a lot of physical representations of robotics. And you're seeing this whole shift in idea towards humanizing those experiences, to where these essentially robots can come into your home. A couple examples are like Curie or Jibo, and they become a central point to kind of a connected home experience. I think that there's room for both the physical robot and the virtual assistants. I think there is going to be overlap between the two, to where physical robotics could essentially become an avatar or a representation of a virtual assistant in like the physical space. There's been a lot of study from when you start getting into the boomer generation, and different studies on adherence when it comes to, you know, doing a program through an online system versus having it through a robot. And they find higher adherence to taking medications and different things through an actual physical robot being present and interacting with the individual. So I do think there are specific use cases where physical robotics will play a role, whereas a majority from a marketing perspective, it's going to be more about the virtual assistants and kind of these kind of connected voice-based ecosystems.
All right. Wow. Well, we'll have to stay tuned. Tom, I thank you so much. We are so grateful for your time and for sharing, you know, your insights about this topic with our audience. We cannot say thank you enough. I know you're very busy, so again, appreciate it very much. Please, again, feel free to connect. Tom is a wonderful resource. If you have any more questions, we truly encourage you to do so. But we will take a little break now. So you'll have the opportunity to network with your peers, email Tom, check out our exhibitor booths, learn more about our sponsors, download information and add it to your briefcase. We have quizzes, you can get a badge. I mean, there's tons of things for you to do. And then I'll see you back here in 15 minutes for our next presentation, which is in partnership with